Okay, so if we're ready to go to round two, will be all music by Nathaniel Dett, and I think anybody who's been following me knows about my interest in Nathaniel Dett and probably has heard me talk about Nathaniel Dett, so I don't want to bore people if you already know about Nathaniel Dett. So how many of you know who Nathaniel Dett was because you went to something that I did? Okay, just about everybody. Okay, so just a quick refresher. He was an African descent composer born in 1882 in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Grew up on the New York side. He was the first African descent person to graduate from Oberlin with a degree in piano and composition in 1908. And then followed a long career in various black colleges. The most notable one was Hampton Institute in Virginia, which is still there. Hampton University is still in Hampton, Virginia. He started the music department there and built the choral program to the point where he could take his groups on tour to the Library of Congress and a big tour to Europe. So he was a marvelous choir director, and his choral works are really stunning, marvelous. If you ever have a chance to listen to Nathaniel Dett choral works, do it, because they're really fabulous. He was also a great piano composer, wrote 6 piano suites, which total about a little over 2 hours. I was the first one to record all of them. And that CD was released in 2015. I have a couple of copies over here if you don't have it. It's really beautiful music. It starts off early on in his life with music that's very much in the romantic tradition. Sounds like Schumann or maybe MacDowell and composers like that he knew and grew up with. Then his music starts to change as things progress in the 1920s and 1930s. It gets a little bit more chromatic, a little bit more complex harmonically, although he doesn't get involved in any of the super dissonant stuff that, say, Stravinsky and Bartók were into. He didn't go in that route. He has a strong root in spirituals. He did a lot of arranging and preserving and study of spirituals during his tenures at Hampton and other places. So there's a spiritual influence in a lot of his pieces. A few, including one of the ones I'm going to play, actually quote spirituals. I'm going to kind of go chronologically and give you a bit of a sampling from some of the 6 suites. Starting with the very first one. The very first one is called Magnolia. Magnolia was the suite that he wrote during his first job out of Oberlin in Tennessee. And there are beautiful magnolia trees on the campus. So that inspired him to write this piece. This is the first movement of that suite called Magnolias. He writes a poetic inscription at the beginning of the piece talking about the magnolia trees, sad in their splendor and heavy with perfume. So you'll hear that portrayal in the music. So you see the young man's romantic soul and romantic heart very much on display with that. The next piece I'm going to play is from his second suite. Second suite, In the Bottoms, was written soon after Magnolias and is still his best known suite. Many people have recorded it. And the final movement of it, the Juba Dance, is his single most popular piece. In the Bottoms refers to the river bottoms in the South, where people live, and the pieces deal with scenes of their lives and pictures of those areas. So one of the movements I'll play later in the program, Barcarolle, is again a river piece. So that's kind of a little bit like Paul's piece, except it's not really portraying the river so much as someone boating or rafting on the river. So this particular piece I'm going to play right now is called His Song, and his song is a lonely man's song about his trouble and his hopes and fears, singing into the night. His weird melody somehow satisfying a yearning of the soul in Dett's words. So as you hear, that piece tells a story. The story is the yearning and sorrow, and then a vision of release, of a harmonious and a redemption to come, only to have that crash and be robbed away, saying, not now. So it's a very marvelous narrative that's just inside of that 3-minute piece or so. It's very, very, very meaningful. I'm going to continue now with music from his third suite. And by the way, one of the reasons why I came up with this idea of doing a sampler of all of the, or most of the suites, is because at the end of next week, I was scheduled to do a lecture recital and to do a performance on the final concert of a big competition in Connecticut, which unfortunately had to be postponed because of the latest wave that's going on. But what their request for the lecture was a sampler of something from each of his periods and each of his suites to illustrate the enormous breadth of his style. So I'm very much hoping that this competition is going to still go forward when things are easier, because one of the most wonderful things about the competition was that the organizers of it came to me and asked me, what should we require of the contestants to play of Nathaniel Dett? Okay, so this is the future. I can put a recording out there and I can play Dett for you, but one of these days I won't be here. So we need to pass this to the next generation. And so far as pianists are concerned, what better way to do that than in a competition? Because pianists are particularly competition pianists, always play the same repertoire, mostly. You hear a small group of pieces played over and over again. So we need to encourage more adventurousness and more use of this music. And also this music, as I tell people, is maybe not the best pieces for competitions because it's intimate, it's poetic. Those things are trouble in competitions. You want something that's just going to like knock people over the head, and maybe there's not too much wiggle room in different ways that you can play it because the judges are always going to say, well, that's not the way you're supposed to do Chopin rubato, that's not the way Beethoven should be done, blah, blah. So, so things that have too much variety in interpretation are not good. It's easier to play things like, okay, there's not too much wiggle room in how you can interpret it, as long as you can put lots of notes down. So I was very excited about this, and I hope that this does take place later. So, but now you get the benefit of hearing the breadth of the style. So I'm going on now with a movement from the next suite, the third one, called Enchantment. And this was written in the 1920s after he had studied at Harvard for a year. And he had met, at this point, Percy Grainger, who you probably know of as being a great pianist in the first half of the 20th century from Australia. And Percy Grainger had championed in the bottoms and played it on his concerts, especially the Jubilees. So Dett wrote this piece for him, and since Percy Grainger was a virtuoso pianist, Dett decided to give him opportunities. So it's a piece that is written more as a concert piece, so it owes more to Liszt and Grieg and composers like that, but yet with more chromatic harmonies that you might recognize are a little bit reminiscent sometimes of Gershwin or things that were going on in the 1920s. The Dance of Desire is the third movement from this 4-movement suite called Enchantment. Percy probably liked to play that one.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because there's a lot of list and flashy stuff in it. Okay, so now the next one is from the fifth suite called Tropic Winter. Tropic Winter was written 15 years after Enchantment, after Dett had gone to Eastman and obtained his master's degree. One of the interesting things about Dett is he never stopped studying. So he went to Eastman when he was already 50 years old, which I can kind of relate to that because I went back to get my doctorate at age 52 at Temple University. So he was always wanting to learn things and to improve his craft. So he went to Eastman, and his master's thesis was the oratorio, The Ordering of Moses. And The Ordering of Moses was premiered by the Cincinnati Symphony in 1937. And it's a major work. It's really marvelous. It was forgotten for a long time, and now in the last several years is starting to get recordings and performances. There's a lot of renewed interest in it. In the initial broadcast in 1937, it was broadcast on the radio. The broadcast was cut off after 45 minutes because people were calling in to complain that the radio was spending so much time airing music by a black composer.
Oh.
So hopefully we've gone a bit, we've progressed a bit since then, and the piece is getting much more study and much more performances. So it's a really marvelous piece. So again, his style is starting to build, starting to get more complex harmonically. It's a little bit richer and thicker. So this piece is called To a Closed Casement, and it's again very filled with yearning, as someone would be singing in front of a closed window, perhaps. So wherever Dett goes with his harmonies and his experimentations, lyricism is always at the front, and you'll hear that here. So the composers among you will say, oh, he's starting to play with more whole tone harmonies, white key chords, and things like that. So he's sort of taking his little adventures in his harmony, always with the lyricism in the forefront. The last suite, the 8 Bible vignettes, I think is Dett's masterpiece, at least for the piano. It was written in the last 2 years of his life, 1942 and 1943. And it's a really quite fascinating piece because you never would really expect that from the title. When you think of vignettes, you usually think of, what, trifles? Something not very consequential, something kind of sweet and light and not very important, maybe. But this piece is anything but, and it takes some investigation. It takes kind of looking under the covers to discover what's really going on. There are 8 pieces. First of all, 8 is important because 8 has a numerological significance. 7 is the number of completion. 8 is the number of new beginning. In many cultures, there's a numerological symbolism in that number. So that immediately starts to kind of make you think maybe something's going on. Incidentally, Paul, the other piece that was written astonishingly in the same year and also has 8 movements is, anybody guess? I'm pretty sure that Dett had no idea, did not know this person. Olivier Messiaen, the Quartet for the End of Time.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
8 movements, written also in 1942 and 1943. Okay, so there, Messiaen is much more upfront about what it's about. Okay, there's a whole religious narrative, Catholic narrative that's going on in there, and Messiaen is putting it right out there for you. Dett, on the other hand, does not really say what's going on, except to say that what the different movements are connected with so far as the biblical stories. The first 4 are from the Old Testament. The next 4 are from the New Testament. And each one begins with the main figure. The first one is Abraham, and the 5th movement, the beginning of the second group of 4, is I am the true vine, which of course is about Jesus. And that movement is a 3-voice fugue in triple meter. So we all know what's going on there. Also, sneakily, the subject of the fugue features an augmented chord, which divides the octave into 3 equal parts. So there's all of this sneaky symbolism going on in Dett's composition, but besides, you don't really need to know that and to appreciate the beauty of the music, other than to know that Dett is starting to get much more interested in counterpoint. So he's writing things like canons and fugues and inversions and all this kind of stuff, a more learned style. The second movement after Father Abraham, which I'm not going to play, but if you get a chance to listen to me doing the entire suite, which I sometimes do, I will play it, is about Hagar. Well, that's interesting. Hagar is not exactly one of your top 10 Sunday school figures that we learn about, but in African culture, she's very significant because she is thought of as the mother of the African nation, because she's Abraham's slave and rejected, and God promises that he will bring forth from her a great nation. So what's that great nation? Well, in African culture, it's the African nation and the African race. So that immediately kind of makes you think there's something interesting going afoot. The third movement is As His Own Soul, which I will play, and that's about the love of Jonathan and David in the book of Samuel. Incidentally, several years ago, I had the opportunity to supply the music for a same-sex wedding at my church in Trenton. And the two people were named John and David. So that was, okay, this is the piece for you. So, and it was really quite wonderful how that fit together. And after the Jesus movement, then you have a movement about Martha. Martha complained. So you have another female character in the Bible. And the very important characters in the Bible are female characters. Then the seventh movement is really the center point of the suite. That's called Other Sheep. It's variations on an African chant and prefaced by a quote from John about other sheep I have that must be brought into the fold. So that's about oneness and about bringing this other race into the main fold and reconciling the oneness of humanity. The last movement, Madrigal Divine, is a setting of Psalm 23. And if you happen to know the text, particularly the King James Version, which Dett knew, then it is actually a setting of it, and with marvelous text painting and so on. So I'm just going to give you a taste of what this is. The whole piece is pretty close to 40 minutes to do the whole thing. So it's really a major work and really a marvelous narrative. I'm particularly fond of Madrigal Divine. It's the last piece that he wrote, and it's a very moving setting of that psalm. So I start with Father Abraham, which quotes the spiritual Father Abraham, and also includes some contrapuntal treatment of the Hebrew tune called Leone. Leone was taken over, I believe, by one of the Wesleys into the Methodist Church as the hymn, God of Abraham we praise. The God of Abraham we praise. So you might actually recognize that, but that was originally sung by a cantor in a synagogue in London that Wesley heard. So it's a Hebrew melody that Dett is mixing together with the Negro spiritual. So I will go back to two pieces from Dett's youth to close out. This will be the last two movements of In the Bottoms, the barcarolle and the jubilance. And as I mentioned before, the barcarolle is portraying someone out on the sunshiny waters and in his raft, and the swaying of the boat or the raft, and the joy and the beautiful wide river, just like you have here. There's one little humorous section towards the end where things get a little bit stirred up. Maybe there's some rough water, and we're having to kind of get control of the boat a little bit here, and then it kind of goes back into its floating. And the Juba dance, of course, is irresistible. That this was Granger's favorite. He used it as an encore all the time. The Juba dance was the ancestor to breakdancing and hip-hop dancing and tap dancing back in the 19th century, and it featured a combination of virtuosity and grace, and that's what Dett wants in his music. I had an interesting experience with this piece. This piece has been recorded many, many times. Many people play it. And I play it faster than pretty much anybody else, except for Percy Granger's piano roll. And the reason is because when I was studying this for my doctorate dissertation at Temple, I decided that I should seek out someone in the dance department and find out what this dance actually looks like. And that's something that pianists don't do enough, particularly people that are playing Bach and people that play Bach and Handel and people from the Baroque period. They're always playing things called sarabands and minuets and allemands and all these things, and who knows anything about what those dances actually looked like? Well, you should. Because then if you know what the dance looks like, then you're going to know something about what the tempo or the feeling or the meter and what that's all about. So I decided to do that and approach the African dance specialist at Temple to see, well, would you choreograph this or at least show me what this thing looked like? And she said, oh yeah, she was all on it. And she decided that she would choreograph this and put it on one of the dance concerts at Temple. And I would play the piano part. Now, of course, she wanted it longer than the original piece was, so then I had to actually play it through twice, which was a bit more of an athletic experience for me, but not quite as athletic as for the dancers. So in rehearsal, I played it at the tempo that everybody else plays it at, and the dancers came up to me and said it was too slow. Okay, well, there's your evidence. Okay, so if the dancers are saying this is the tempo that needs to go at, then this is what it is, because they understand what the ethnic basis of the dance is. It's very athletic, so it needs to go quick, and it needs to have energy, but yet with finish and grace. So that's the challenge for the player.